"Your wife paid me to kill you today," whispered the beggar boy to the millionaire, his tiny hand gripping what looked like a real gun. The man freezes, heart pounding, trying to understand if this is a prank or a threat. But when he finds out who sent the boy and why, his world begins to unravel. Because behind that chilling whisper is a plan that has nothing to do with murder, and everything to do with saving a life. Who is this boy? Why would a wife stage something so dangerous? And what secret is she trying to reveal before it's too late? This is a powerful story of second chances, broken trust, and a heart that needed to be broken open to finally heal. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Through the tinted windows of his Tesla Model S, Langston watched the morning traffic crawl past gleaming office towers. Seattle's tech district hummed with its usual Tuesday morning energy, though the cloudy sky cast everything in shades of gray. He adjusted his perfectly knotted tie, more out of habit than necessity. "Yes, I understand the concerns about the Series C funding," Langston said into his wireless earpiece, his voice maintaining the same measured tone he'd perfected over years of high-stakes negotiations. "But our AI development timeline is solid. The metrics speak for themselves." He stepped out of his car, his Italian leather shoes meeting wet pavement. The spring air held a familiar dampness, but Langston barely noticed it anymore. His mind was already racing through spreadsheets and projection models, calculating possibilities with the precision of the computers he'd built his fortune on. "The board meeting on Thursday will address those points," he continued, reaching for his briefcase in the passenger seat. "We've prepared extensive documentation on the— Your wife paid me to kill you today." The small voice cut through Langston's carefully ordered world like a static burst in clean code. He turned, his hand still on the briefcase handle, and found himself looking at a boy standing at the curb. The child couldn't have been more than 8 years old, thin frame swimming in an oversized blue hoodie. His dark skin contrasted sharply with the white shirt visible at his collar, and his eyes. Those eyes held something that made Langston's practiced calm waver for just a moment. But what truly commanded Langston's attention was the small black pistol the boy held in both hands. The weapon trembled slightly, but those eyes never wavered from Langston's face. "I need to call you back," Langston said quietly into his earpiece, ending the call with a single tap. Years of crisis management kicked in automatically, and he assessed the situation with rapid efficiency. No immediate pedestrian traffic, security cameras on his building's entrance, the weapons angle, the boy's stance. Amateur, unpracticed. Slowly, deliberately, Langston lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself closer to the child's eye level. The wet pavement soaked through his designer pants, but he barely registered the discomfort. His voice, when he spoke, carried the same steady calm he used in board meetings, though something else had crept in, something warmer, more present. "Where is she?" he asked simply. The boy's hands tightened on the gun, but Langston noticed his breathing had steadied slightly at the calm response. With a small nod of his head, the child indicated the building across the street, St. Michael's Church, its red brick facade weathered by decades of Seattle rain. Below street level, a sign advertised the church's soup kitchen, its hours written in fading paint. Langston took in this information without changing his expression, though his mind was already mapping possibilities, calculating risks and solutions. The mention of his wife sent a familiar ache through his chest. Their separation 6 months ago had been clinical, efficient, like everything else in his life. She'd called him a robot, said he'd turned their marriage into a series of transactions. Looking at the boy now, Langston saw fear beneath the brave facade. He recognized it. The same fear he'd buried under spreadsheets and coding sessions. The fear of connecting, of being vulnerable, of failing at the most human things. "What's your name?" Langston asked, keeping his voice gentle. "Elijah," the boy answered, then quickly added, "Don't try anything funny. I'm supposed to watch you." Langston nodded slowly. "Okay, Elijah, I'm Langston, and I think we should probably talk to whoever sent you, don't you?" Something flickered in Elijah's eyes, relief perhaps, or uncertainty. The gun lowered slightly, though his grip remained firm. "You're not scared," Elijah observed, a question hidden in the statement. "I'm concerned," Langston replied honestly, "but not about the gun. I'm concerned about you." This seemed to catch Elijah off guard. The practiced toughness in his expression cracked just slightly, revealing a glimpse of the child beneath the mission he'd been given, or had given himself. Langston stood carefully, telegraphing each movement. "Let's walk over together," he suggested, moving slowly to Elijah's side. He didn't reach for the gun yet, but kept his hand near it, ready to intervene if necessary. The weapon looked real enough, though something about its weight and the way Elijah held it sparked questions in Langston's analytical mind. They began crossing the street together, an odd pair in the morning light, the tall tech executive in his perfect suit, and the small boy with his oversized hoodie and trembling hands. Their footsteps fell into sync on the wet pavement, and the silence between them held questions neither was ready to voice. The church's shadow fell over them as they approached the soup kitchen entrance. Langston felt the weight of the moment, the strangeness of how his carefully planned day had shattered with a child's words. For the first time in months, maybe years, he was fully present, every sense alive to the reality around him, the damp air on his face, the sound of their footsteps, the quiet breathing of the boy beside him. He'd built his career on controlling variables, on turning chaos into clean lines of code. But there was no algorithm for this moment, no flowchart to follow. Looking down at Elijah's determined face, Langston realized he would have to navigate this situation with something other than logic, something he'd forgotten how to use long ago. They reached the soup kitchen door together, their reflections ghostly in the scratched glass. The gun in Elijah's hands caught the gray morning light, a dark punctuation mark in their shared story. The soup kitchen's heavy door creaked open, releasing a wave of warm air scented with lentils and fresh-baked bread. Langston blinked as his eyes adjusted to the fluorescent lighting that cast a harsh glow over the worn linoleum floors. Beside him, Elijah's sneakers squeaked against the tiles, his small frame still tense but moving forward with determination. Metal chairs scraped against the floor as early lunch visitors settled in at long folding tables. Volunteers in faded aprons moved efficiently between the kitchen and dining area, carrying steaming trays and wiping down surfaces. None of them seemed to notice the strange pair, a tech executive in his tailored suit and a small boy clutching what looked like a toy gun. The serving line stretched along one wall, steam rising from industrial-sized pots behind a stainless steel counter. And there, ladling soup into bowls with practiced ease, stood Cynthia. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, wisps escaping to frame her face. She wore no makeup, her natural beauty enhanced by the slight flush from the kitchen's heat. A far cry from the polished corporate wife she'd once been, but somehow more alive than Langston had ever seen her. When she looked up and saw them, her face broke into a wide grin that transformed her entire countenance. "Oh, good," she said, setting down her ladle and wiping her hands on her apron. "He found you." Her eyes danced with a mixture of mischief and something deeper, more challenging. "I told him to say something wild, thought it might crack your face open." Langston said nothing. His expression remained carefully neutral as he knelt beside Elijah, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. With gentle fingers, he opened the boy's small hands, which had begun to sweat around the gun's grip. The metal was cold against his palm as he took possession of the weapon, and his tech-trained mind registered several details at once: the rust along the barrel, the authentic weight, the empty chamber visible when he carefully checked it. This was no toy. He looked up to see Cynthia's smile falter, the color draining from her face as she realized what Elijah had actually been holding. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white with sudden understanding. "My office," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She gestured to another volunteer to take her place, then led them through a swinging door into the kitchen. The sounds of clattering pots and sizzling griddles surrounded them as they wound their way past busy cooks to a small door marked "Administrative Office." The office was barely larger than a closet, with just enough room for a desk covered in grant applications and food bank schedules. A small window let in gray light, and a child's drawing was pinned to the corkboard. Stick figures holding hands under a rainbow sky, signed in crayon, "Love, Elijah." Cynthia closed the door behind them, the small space now crowded with their presence. Elijah perched on the edge of a folding chair, his earlier bravado replaced by uncertainty as he watched the adults' tense faces. "Elijah makes up missions," Cynthia explained, her voice soft but steady. She moved to stand behind the boy, placing protective hands on his shoulders. "Pretending is how he survives. If he's pretending, there's still hope." Her fingers gently squeezed, and Elijah leaned back slightly into her touch, trust evident in the small gesture. Langston looked between them, his analytical mind trying to process this new data. His wife's tender protectiveness, the boy's complex mix of vulnerability and resilience, the real gun that had somehow found its way into a child's imagination game. The variables refused to resolve into a clean equation. "Where did he get the gun?" Langston asked quietly, his voice carefully controlled. Cynthia shook her head, pain evident in her expression. "I didn't know. I would never." She swallowed hard. "Elijah, honey, where did you find it?" The boy's shoulders hunched slightly. "Behind the dumpster last week. I thought it would make the mission more real." His voice grew smaller. "I didn't mean to scare anyone." "Not really." Langston pulled a paper towel from the dispenser on the desk and carefully wrapped the weapon, tucking it into his coat pocket. The weight of it felt wrong there, among his phone and car keys, tools of his ordered world. He looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time in months. The warmth in her eyes when she gazed at Elijah, the strength in her stance despite her obvious distress, the purpose that seemed to radiate from her very being. All of it was so far from the carefully curated life they'd shared before. "I should go," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. The morning's surreal events had already made him late for 3 meetings, but that wasn't why he needed to leave. He needed space to process, to think, to understand what had just happened and why it felt so significant. Elijah watched him with those penetrating eyes, no longer afraid but curious, assessing. Cynthia nodded, understanding in her expression. "There's fresh soup if you want some, Elijah," she said softly. "You can watch the street from the window seat." The boy slipped off the chair and headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. He turned back to Langston, his face serious. "Mission accomplished?" he asked, a hint of hope in his voice. Langston felt something shift in his chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Mission accomplished," he confirmed, and was rewarded with a small, genuine smile before Elijah disappeared into the kitchen. The sound of his footsteps faded, leaving Langston and Cynthia in a weighted silence. There were words that needed to be said, questions that needed to be asked, but neither seemed ready for that conversation. Instead, Langston simply nodded once and stepped out of the office, navigating his way back through the kitchen and dining area to the street. Through the soup kitchen's window, he could see Elijah settling into a corner seat with a steaming bowl, his eyes tracking Langston's movement outside. The boy raised his hand in a small wave, and Langston found himself returning the gesture before turning toward his office building. That night, in his minimalist apartment with its view of the city lights, Langston stood at his desk drawer with the wrapped gun in his hands. The drawer's lock clicked with precision as he secured the weapon inside, but sleep eluded him. He lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the morning's events in an endless loop. The gun's weight in his pocket, Cynthia's smile, Elijah's eyes, the smell of soup and bread, the missions we create to survive, the truth hiding behind pretense, the real weapons we carry, visible and invisible. Later, the morning sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Langston's corner office, but he barely noticed the view. His computer screen showed 3 unread emails from investors and a calendar reminder for a meeting that had started 10 minutes ago. He hadn't moved to attend it. Instead, his mind kept returning to yesterday's encounter, playing it on loop like debugging code. The weight of the gun in his pocket, the slight tremor in Elijah's small hands, the words that had cracked through his carefully maintained routine. "Your wife paid me to kill you today." He rubbed his temples, trying to focus on the spreadsheet before him. Numbers usually made sense. They were clean, logical, predictable. But now they blurred together, replaced by images of a thin boy in a too large coat, holding a weapon he should never have found. His phone buzzed. Another meeting reminder. Langston stood up abruptly, grabbing his jacket from the back of his ergonomic chair. "Cancel my afternoon appointments," he told his assistant as he strode past her desk. She looked up, startled by the unexpected instruction from her usually clockwork-precise boss. "But sir, the board meeting—" "Reschedule it," he said, already halfway to the elevator. The walk to the soup kitchen took exactly 7 minutes. Langston knew because he'd counted each step, trying to make sense of why he was going there. He had no plan, no objective, nothing that fit into his usual framework of measurable goals and expected outcomes. He spotted Elijah before reaching the building. The boy sat on the concrete steps leading up to the soup kitchen's entrance, a packet of saltine crackers in his lap. He was carefully breaking each cracker into precise quarters, creating neat stacks on his thigh. Langston approached slowly, noting how Elijah's shoulders tensed slightly at his footsteps before relaxing again. The boy didn't look up, but Langston could tell he was being watched through peripheral vision, a survival skill no child should need to master. Kneeling down beside the steps, Langston brought himself to eye level with Elijah. His suit pants would probably get dirty, but for once, he didn't care. "Want lunch?" he asked, keeping his voice casual, as if this was a normal occurrence between them. Elijah's hands stilled on the crackers. He turned his head slowly, studying Langston with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see straight through adult pretenses. Several seconds passed as he appeared to weigh his options, assess potential threats, calculate risks and rewards. Finally, he nodded, gathering his carefully quartered crackers and wrapping them in their plastic sleeve before tucking them into his coat pocket. They walked side by side to a nearby diner, one of those classic establishments with chrome trim and vinyl booths. A bell chimed as they entered, and the waitress barely glanced up as they slid into a booth by the window. "I have to tell you something important," Elijah said as soon as they were seated, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But you have to promise not to tell anyone else. It's classified information." Langston nodded solemnly, noting how the boy's eyes darted around the diner, checking exits and sightlines even as he launched into his tale. "I'm actually a secret agent," Elijah confided, leaning forward. "Trained personally by the ghost of Harriet Tubman herself. She comes to me in dreams and teaches me special codes and escape routes." The waitress arrived with menus, but Elijah barely paused. "She showed me how to recruit spy pigeons too. They're everywhere in the city, gathering intelligence. See that one outside?" He pointed to a plump gray bird strutting past the diner's window. "Agent Feathers, one of my best operatives." Langston's face remained largely impassive, but he listened intently, noting how Elijah's stories wove together elements of history he must have learned in school with the raw material of his imagination. The boy ordered a cheeseburger and fries when prompted, then immediately returned to his narrative. "The pigeons help me map out safe houses," he explained, his small fingers tracing patterns on the tabletop. "Sometimes they leave me secret messages in their feathers. Agent Feathers once helped me track a suspicious character all the way from Central Park to Broadway. Their food arrived, and Elijah paused his tale long enough to take a few bites of his burger. Langston noticed how he ate carefully, methodically, as if measuring out how long he could make the meal last. When he was about halfway through his fries, he began wrapping them carefully in paper napkins, creating small packages that disappeared into his coat pockets. Langston pretended not to notice, instead asking, "And what does the ghost of Harriet Tubman say about your current mission?" Elijah's eyes lit up at the question, though something vulnerable flickered beneath the excitement. "She says sometimes the bravest thing is to trust people who seem different from you, like how she trusted the white abolitionists who helped with the Underground Railroad." He paused, studying Langston's face. "But she also says to always have an escape route planned, just in case." When they finished eating, Langston paid the bill while Elijah waited by the door, one hand resting near his pocket full of saved fries. They walked back to the soup kitchen together, Elijah pointing out various pigeons along the way and explaining their code names and special abilities. At the steps where he'd found Elijah earlier, Langston stopped. The boy turned to look at him, his expression shifting from animated storyteller back to careful observer. "I'll be back next week," Langston said, his voice matter of fact. "Same time." Through the soup kitchen's window, he could see Cynthia watching them. Her expression held a quiet pride, not triumph or vindication, but something softer and more complex. She didn't wave or acknowledge him directly, but her presence felt like a gentle pressure at the edge of his awareness. Elijah's face remained neutral, but his eyes brightened slightly. "Agent Feathers will keep tabs on you," he said seriously. "Make sure you're not followed." Langston nodded, matching the boy's gravity. "I appreciate the surveillance support." As he turned to leave, he heard Elijah's voice slightly softer. "Mission parameters accepted?" "Accepted," Langston confirmed without turning around. He could feel both Elijah's and Cynthia's eyes on him as he walked away, their gazes like invisible threads connecting him to something he didn't quite understand yet. A week passed like binary code, predictable, ordered, yet somehow incomplete. Langston found himself checking the time more frequently as Tuesday approached, his normally laser-focused mind drifting to thoughts of spy pigeons and carefully quartered crackers. When the day arrived, he left his office at precisely 11:45 a.m., carrying a worn chess set he'd purchased from a second-hand store over the weekend. The pieces had character, tiny nicks and scratches that told stories of previous games, previous players. A paper bag containing a new navy blue hoodie swung gently at his side as he walked. The morning's gray clouds had given way to patches of autumn sunshine, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. As he rounded the corner, he saw Elijah already stationed at his post near the curb, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet. The boy's keen eyes spotted him immediately. Elijah sprang up from his waiting position, his right hand snapping into a crisp salute that would have made any military officer proud. "Agent reporting for duty, sir," he announced, loud enough for several passers-by to turn their heads. Langston nodded solemnly, though something tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but closer than usual. "Mission 2?" he asked, holding up the chess set. "Affirmative." Elijah's eyes lit up at the sight of the box. "But first we need to establish proper protocol. You can't just walk around like a civilian anymore. You need to learn the spy walk." "The spy walk," Langston repeated carefully as if memorizing a new programming language. "Watch and learn." Elijah demonstrated, moving with exaggerated stealth, his feet rolling from heel to toe in a smooth motion. He kept his shoulders loose but ready, head turning in precise movements to scan their surroundings. This way nobody suspects you're gathering intelligence, they just think you're weird. A sound escaped Langston's throat, something between a cough and a chuckle. He adjusted his grip on the chess set and attempted to mirror Elijah's movements. His first try was stiff, corporate, like a robot attempting to mimic human behavior. No, Elijah sighed, shaking his head. "You're too rigid. You look like a malfunctioning robot. Here." He demonstrated again, this time adding a slight swagger. "You have to feel it in your bones, like you're floating on air but ready to karate chop a bad guy at any second." They practiced the spy walk all the way to the nearby park, Elijah offering running commentary on Langston's technique. Better. Oh, that was terrible. Okay, not bad. You're still too robotic, but maybe we can say you're an android spy." The park was relatively empty at this hour, with just a few people walking dogs or eating lunch on benches. Elijah led them to a concrete chess table, giving it a thorough inspection before declaring it secure for their mission. As Langston set up the pieces, Elijah paced around the table, still in character. "From now on, your codename is Agent Softface," he declared. Langston's hands paused over the pawns. "Agent Softface?" "Because you look all serious, but your face is actually soft, like a teddy bear trying to be scary." Elijah demonstrated by scrunching up his own face in an exaggerated stern expression, then letting it melt into an exaggerated smile. This time, Langston did smile, just slightly, but it was there. "Understood. And your code name?" Ghost runner, Elijah said promptly. Because I'm fast and invisible when I need to be. Something flickered across his face as he said this, a shadow of experience that no 8-year-old should have. They began to play, Langston quickly realizing that Elijah's understanding of chess was creative at best. The boy moved pieces according to his own internal logic, occasionally declaring new rules mid-game. Knights can do backflips over other pieces, he announced, demonstrating with an elaborate leap that knocked over 2 pawns. And if they do, they get to free any captured pieces from jail. Jail? Langston asked, looking at the small collection of captured pieces at the side of the board. Yeah, see, when you capture a piece, they go to jail, but they can be rescued if you perform a special operation. Elijah proceeded to explain an increasingly complex system of jailbreaks and rescue missions that bore little resemblance to traditional chess. Langston found himself adapting to these new rules, his tactical mind engaging with Elijah's imaginative play in unexpected ways. He even suggested a few special operations of his own, which Elijah enthusiastically incorporated into their game. As the afternoon light began to soften, Langston reached for the paper bag beside him. "I brought you something," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. Elijah's hand stilled over the chess pieces. He looked at the bag with a mixture of excitement and wariness, the expression of a child who had learned that gifts sometimes came with unexpected prices. "It's just a hoodie," Langston said quickly, pulling out the navy blue garment. The material was soft, high quality, chosen specifically because it looked durable enough to last. Elijah reached out slowly, running his fingers over the fabric. His face brightened as he felt the material. "This one doesn't itch," he said, surprise and pleasure mixing in his voice. "That's cool." He slipped it on immediately, the sleeves falling past his hands. The hood enveloped his head like a protective shell, and Langston noticed how the boy's shoulders relaxed slightly beneath the soft fabric. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Elijah packed up the chess pieces with careful precision, making sure each one was properly debriefed before being returned to the box. He handed the set back to Langston with a formal nod. "Same time next week?" he asked, trying to sound casual but unable to completely hide the hope in his voice. "Same time," Langston confirmed. "I'll work on my spy walk." Elijah grinned, then took off running back toward the soup kitchen, his new hoodie fluttering behind him like a cape. Langston watched until he disappeared around the corner, making sure he arrived safely at his destination. Walking home, Langston's path took him past a sneaker store. The window display caught his eye, rows of brightly colored athletic shoes arranged in a gradient pattern. Without really thinking about it, he found himself pushing open the door, a small bell announcing his entrance. He moved through the aisles slowly, looking at the children's section with new interest. His eyes scanned the sizes, trying to estimate what might fit an 8-year-old boy. He didn't need shoes himself. His Italian leather Oxfords were perfectly adequate. But he lingered, examining the smaller sizes, noting the prices, the durability of different brands. The next evening after work, Langston stood in the sneaker store again, this time with purpose. His fingers traced the smooth leather of various children's shoes, comparing quality and durability. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he moved methodically through the aisles, examining each option with the same attention he'd give to analyzing market data. He finally settled on 2 pairs. The first was a pair of electric blue high tops with neon yellow accents and light-up soles, exactly the kind of flashy footwear that seemed to match Elijah's vibrant personality. The second was more practical, sturdy black sneakers with reinforced toes and water-resistant material, built to last through countless missions and adventures. The cashier raised an eyebrow at the professional-looking man in an expensive suit, buying children's sneakers, but Langston barely noticed. His mind was already calculating the quickest route to the soup kitchen. 20 minutes later, he pushed open the heavy wooden door of the church basement. The familiar smell of today's dinner, something with tomatoes and herbs, wafted through the air. A few early diners sat at the long tables while volunteers bustled around with trays and utensils. Elijah sat in his usual corner, homework spread across the table in front of him. His new navy hoodie was zipped up against the basement's chill, and he was chewing on the end of a pencil, deep in concentration. He looked up as Langston's shadow fell across his math problems. "Agent Softface," he whispered, immediately straightening his posture. "I wasn't expecting a briefing today." Langston set the large shopping bag on the table. "Special delivery," he said quietly. "Mission equipment." Elijah's eyes widened as Langston pulled out the 2 boxes. The boy's hands hovered over them, not quite touching, as if they might disappear if he moved too quickly. When he finally lifted the lid of the first box, his sharp intake of breath was audible. These light up," he breathed, lifting one of the blue high tops reverently. The second box revealed the black sneakers, and Elijah ran his fingers over the sturdy material. His expression shifted from awe to something more complicated. "I can't take both," he said firmly, pushing one box away. "That's too much." Langston shook his head. "Mission budget's been increased," he said, using Elijah's own language. "Every agent needs proper equipment. 1 pair for special ops, 1 pair for covert missions." Elijah looked uncertain, but his hands kept straying back to the shoes. He picked up one of the blue high tops again, turning it over in his hands. Can I try them on?" "That's an order, Agent." A grin broke across Elijah's face as he quickly unlaced his worn-out sneakers. The new ones fit perfectly. Langston had remembered the size from checking the boys' old shoes during their chess game. Elijah stood up and took a few experimental steps, watching the lights flash with each movement. Then, suddenly, his expression grew serious. He sat back down, the lights on his new shoes still blinking softly under the table. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I wasn't going to shoot you that first day, I just wanted to see what you'd do." Langston felt his body go still. He studied Elijah's face carefully, noting the tension around the boy's eyes, the way his fingers gripped the edge of the table. "Most people walk away," Elijah added, his voice even quieter now. He wasn't looking at Langston anymore, instead focusing intently on the flashing lights of his new shoes. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Langston thought about that first morning. The small figure with the gun, the trembling hands, the fierce determination in those young eyes. He thought about all the people who must have walked away before, all the times this child had been left behind. "Well," Langston said finally, keeping his voice steady, "I'm not most people." Elijah looked up at him then, a flash of hope crossing his face before he could hide it. "Come on," Langston said, standing up. "Let's get you home before it gets dark." Elijah carefully packed up his homework and put on his old shoes, insisting on carrying the boxes with the new ones himself. They walked out into the evening air, Elijah leading the way through streets that grew progressively more worn down. The group shelter was a converted brownstone with peeling paint and uneven steps leading up to the front door. A flickering fluorescent light cast harsh shadows in the entrance hallway as they stepped inside. The walls were clean but shabby, with notices and rules posted everywhere. A woman in her 50s sat behind a desk near the entrance, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked up as they entered, her eyes immediately fixing on Langston with a mixture of suspicion and protective concern. "Ms. Rita," Elijah said, "this is my friend. He got me shoes for missions." The woman's expression remained guarded as she looked Langston up and down. He could read the questions in her eyes, the natural protectiveness of someone who had likely seen too many children disappointed or hurt by adults who came and went. "I'm just—" Langston paused, then continued softly. "A friend." Ms. Rita's expression softened slightly, though the watchfulness remained. She nodded once, then turned to Elijah. "Dinner's in 20 minutes, young man. Get washed up." "Yes, ma'am," Elijah replied. He turned to Langston, giving him a formal salute. "Thank you for the mission equipment, sir." Langston returned the salute, matching Elijah's seriousness. "Same time tomorrow for chess?" Elijah's face lit up. "I'll be there." He hurried down the hallway, shoeboxes clutched carefully to his chest. Later that night, Langston sat in his modern apartment, surrounded by the usual blue glow of multiple screens. His laptop sat closed on the coffee table. The first time in months, it hadn't been opened immediately upon his return home. Instead, he sat in his expensive leather chair, thinking about peeling paint and flickering lights, about small hands holding shoeboxes like treasure, about all the people who had walked away. The text message from Cynthia arrived on Thursday afternoon, right in the middle of Langston's third meeting of the day. His phone buzzed against the conference room table, drawing his eyes away from yet another PowerPoint presentation about market projections. Community dinner tomorrow at 6, the kind with paper plates and too much noise, you should come. Langston stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen. The last time he'd been to one of these dinners was 8 months ago, before their separation. Back then, he'd spent most of the evening checking emails on his phone under the table while Cynthia worked the room, connecting with everyone as naturally as breathing. He typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, "Okay." The next evening, Langston pulled up to the church 15 minutes early, his hands tight on the steering wheel. Through the basement windows, he could see people setting up long folding tables, the fluorescent lights casting a warm glow onto the sidewalk. The familiar knot of anxiety formed in his stomach, the one that always appeared when he faced situations he couldn't control or predict. Inside, the basement hummed with activity. Volunteers bustled back and forth carrying massive trays of food, while kids darted between the tables, their laughter echoing off the concrete walls. The air was thick with the smell of garlic bread and marinara sauce. Cynthia stood near the serving counter, directing traffic with the easy authority of someone who had done this hundreds of times. She caught his eye and nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore one of her old Stanford sweatshirts, the one with paint stains from when they'd redecorated their first apartment together. "Agent Softface?" A familiar voice cut through the chaos. Elijah emerged from behind a column, wearing his new blue high tops that flashed with each step. "You came to headquarters." "Wouldn't miss it," Langston replied, allowing himself to be led to one of the tables by his sleeve. The folding chairs were uncomfortable, and the table wobbled slightly, but Elijah didn't seem to notice as he settled in beside Langston. Gospel music played softly from someone's portable speaker, providing a gentle backdrop to the growing dinner crowd. More kids filled in around them, some Langston recognized from his visits to the soup kitchen. They eyed him curiously, the man in business casual clothes who looked slightly out of place among the regular crowd. "This is Agent Softface," Elijah announced to the table with authority. "He used to be one of the top spies in the world, but then he ate some poisoned spaghetti and lost his memory." Langston blinked, catching the mischievous glint in Elijah's eye. A few kids giggled, while others leaned in, clearly interested. "Is that true?" asked a girl with beaded braids, maybe a year younger than Elijah. Before Langston could respond, Elijah jumped in. "Of course it is. Why do you think he works with computers now? It's his cover story while he tries to remember his real identity." To Langston's surprise, he found himself nodding along. "The spaghetti was actually quite good," he added seriously, "until the poison kicked in." This earned more laughs from the kids, and soon Elijah was spinning an elaborate tale about Langston's supposed spy adventures, each one more outrageous than the last. According to Elijah, Langston had once parachuted into a volcano, fought 3 sharks underwater with nothing but a plastic fork, and prevented World War III by winning a chess match against an evil scientist. Across the table, Cynthia had taken a seat. She watched their exchange with an expression Langston couldn't quite read, something between amusement and something deeper, more complicated. Their eyes met briefly over the basket of garlic bread being passed around, and for a moment he saw a flash of the girl he'd met in college, the one who could always make him laugh even during finals week. The dinner proceeded with a warmth and chaos that Langston found surprisingly comfortable. Kids reached over each other for seconds, sauce occasionally spilled, and the volume level steadily increased. But instead of checking his phone or thinking about work, Langston found himself fully present, adding details to Elijah's stories and passing plates of food down the table. As people began clearing their plates, Elijah leaned close to Langston's ear. "You looked like a human today," he whispered, then darted off to help collect empty plates before Langston could respond. The words hit him harder than he expected. He sat there, surrounded by the gentle chaos of cleanup, thinking about how long it had been since he'd truly felt present in a moment. How long since he'd allowed himself to just be. As he stood to leave, Cynthia approached him, holding a manila envelope. Their fingers brushed slightly as she handed it to him, and he noticed she was wearing the small silver ring he'd given her on their first anniversary, back when they were still students, when everything seemed possible. "Found these while cleaning out some old boxes," she said softly. "Thought you might want them." Langston opened the envelope carefully and pulled out several worn pieces of paper. His breath caught as he recognized them. Sketches they'd made together during their senior year of college, character designs for a children's educational app they'd dreamed of creating. There was the clever fox who taught coding basics, the wise owl who explained algorithms, all drawn in Cynthia's flowing style with his neat annotations in the margins. They'd spent countless nights in the campus coffee shop working on these, fueled by too much caffeine and the certainty that they could change the world together. The app never materialized. Reality and corporate jobs had gotten in the way. But looking at the sketches now, Langston could almost smell the coffee and hear their excited discussions about user interfaces and learning curves. He held the envelope carefully as if the papers inside might crumble if he gripped too hard. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice rougher than he intended. Cynthia nodded, then turned to help a volunteer who was struggling with a stack of chairs. Langston made his way to the exit, the envelope precious in his hands, the sound of laughter and gospel music following him up the stairs. The autumn sun cast long shadows through the glass walls of the Nexus Technologies building as Elijah stood outside, clutching his backpack straps. He'd taken the bus across town by himself, carefully counting the stops just like the shelter staff had taught him. His drawing was safely tucked inside a folder, protected from creases. The building stretched up into the sky like something from one of his science fiction movies, all gleaming steel and tinted windows. People in suits streamed in and out through the revolving doors, their shoes clicking against the polished marble floor of the lobby. Elijah took a deep breath and stepped forward, trying to walk tall like Langston had shown him. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity. A massive screen displayed the company logo, while security guards in dark uniforms stood at their posts. The air smelled clean and artificial, like lemons and new carpet. Elijah approached the front desk, where a woman in a crisp blazer typed rapidly on her computer. "Excuse me," he said, using his most grown-up voice. "I'm here to see Langston Williams." The receptionist glanced up, her perfectly shaped eyebrows rising slightly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but..." Elijah reached for his backpack. "I brought something to show him. He's my friend." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm sorry, but we can't allow unauthorized visitors without appointments, especially..." She paused, looking him over. "Especially minors without adult supervision." "But I know him," Elijah insisted, his voice rising slightly. "We play chess. He gave me these shoes." He pointed to his blue high tops, the ones that still made him smile every time he put them on. A security guard had started moving in their direction, his radio crackling softly at his hip. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, positioning himself between Elijah and the desk. "No problem," Elijah said quickly, backing up a step. "I just need to wait for Langston. He works here. Top floor, corner office. He has a plant that's dying because he forgets to water it." The guard's expression didn't change. "Son, why don't you have a seat over there while we sort this out?" He gestured to a row of leather chairs against the wall. Elijah knew that tone. It was the same one the social workers used when they were about to say no to something. But he'd come too far to give up now. He nodded and went to sit down, his drawing still safe in his backpack. Time crawled by. Elijah watched people come and go, their conversations floating past in fragments. Two executives in expensive suits stopped near his chair, speaking in low voices about quarterly reports and market strategies. "Who's the stray?" one of them asked, nodding in Elijah's direction. "Security's handling it," the other replied. "Probably wandered in from that shelter down on Mason Street. They really should keep better track of their charges." Elijah's cheeks burned. He stared hard at his new shoes, trying to make himself invisible like he did at the shelter when new potential foster parents came through. The executives moved on, their leather shoes squeaking slightly against the floor. Finally, a call came through to security. The guard who had been watching Elijah spoke into his radio, then approached. "Mr. Williams has been notified. He's in a meeting, but..." Before he could finish, the elevator doors opened and Langston emerged. His tie was slightly loose, and he held his phone in one hand, screen still glowing. He scanned the lobby until he spotted Elijah. For a moment, no one moved. Elijah could see the conflict play across Langston's face: surprise, concern, and something else. Something that made Elijah's stomach twist. "Sir," the security guard began, "this young man claims to know you. He's been waiting here for almost an hour. We were about to contact..." "It's fine," Langston said, but his voice was quiet, measured. He didn't step forward immediately, didn't raise his voice to defend Elijah, just stood there, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit. The executives from earlier had returned, watching the scene unfold with poorly concealed interest. Elijah could feel their stares, could practically hear their thoughts about the strange black kid in the lobby of their pristine building. Langston finally moved, walking over to where Elijah sat. "Let's go outside," he said softly, not meeting anyone's eyes. Elijah stood, his legs feeling heavy. He followed Langston through the revolving door, past the curious glances and whispered conversations. The autumn air hit them both, carrying the smell of car exhaust and fallen leaves. They stood in silence for a long moment. Elijah's throat felt tight, but he forced the words out anyway. "When I saw the look on your face, I knew you weren't one of us." He reached into his backpack and pulled out the folder. The drawing inside was torn now. He wasn't sure when it had happened, maybe when he'd shoved it back in after the guard first approached. He handed it to Langston anyway. The paper showed their spy base as Elijah had imagined it, a treehouse-like structure with secret passages and hidden rooms, where they could plan missions and keep watch over the city. He'd drawn Langston at a computer made of cardboard boxes wearing a cape. Now a jagged tear ran through the middle of the image, splitting their imaginary world in two. Without another word, Elijah turned and walked toward the bus stop at the corner. His shoes didn't seem to flash as brightly anymore. Behind him, Langston stood motionless, holding the torn drawing in hands that had never learned how to fix broken things. Sometime later, the autumn rain tapped against Langston's office window as he stared at his phone. The message to Cynthia felt inadequate. "Have you seen him?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No response. He couldn't focus on the quarterly reports spread across his desk. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted to the corner where Elijah had planned to show him the drawing. The cleaning staff had vacuumed away any trace of the boy's presence, but Langston could still see him standing there, backpack clutched tight, eyes wide with hope. By late afternoon, the rain had settled into a steady drizzle. Langston left work early, his Tesla cutting through puddles as he made his way to the soup kitchen. The familiar smell of bread and vegetables filled the air as he pushed through the door, but something felt different. The usual warmth was missing. A volunteer he recognized, Sarah, he thought her name was, looked up from wiping tables. "He's not here," she said quietly, knowing exactly who Langston was looking for. "Hasn't been since..." She trailed off, busying herself with the cleaning. Langston stood in the doorway, water dripping from his coat onto the linoleum floor. The space felt emptier without Elijah's animated stories echoing off the walls. No tales of spy pigeons or secret missions, just the quiet clinking of dishes being washed and the hum of industrial freezers. He found himself walking toward the back office where he knew Cynthia would be working on volunteer schedules. The door was open, and she sat at her desk, a stack of papers in front of her. She didn't look up when he entered. "It happened so fast," Langston began, his voice sounding hollow even to his own ears. "The executives were there, and security, and I just..." "Stop." Cynthia's voice cut through his explanation like a knife. She finally looked up, and Langston saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Not anger exactly, but a deep disappointment that made him want to step back. "You want to love a black kid like a hobby," she said, each word deliberate and sharp. "You want the cute parts, the funny stories. You want his smile, not his anger." The truth of her words hit Langston like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. "Do you know what he said to me?" Cynthia continued, standing up from her desk. "He said, 'Miss Cynthia, I shouldn't have gone there. That's not my world. An 8-year-old child shouldn't have to understand that, but he does. Because people like you teach him every day.'" Langston gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles white. "I didn't mean to." "Of course you didn't mean to," Cynthia interrupted. "You never mean to. You just stand there, silent, while the world reminds him he doesn't belong. You play chess with him and buy him shoes. But when it matters, when he needs you to be loud, to be angry, to fight for him, you freeze." She moved around the desk closer to him. He's been staying in his bunk at the shelter, not talking, not playing. No more missions or stories. Just lying there, staring at the wall. Because another adult in his life proved what he already suspected, that he's only welcome in our world when it's convenient. The rain outside had grown heavier, drumming against the windows. Langston felt each drop like an accusation. He thought about Elijah's face in the lobby, the moment of recognition when he saw Langston hesitate, the way the light had gone out of his eyes. "I want to fix this," Langston said, but his voice sounded weak even to himself. "Fix what?" Cynthia asked. "The fact that you showed him exactly what he expected? That when faced with a choice between your comfort and his dignity, you chose yourself? Some things can't be fixed with money or chess sets or new shoes, Langston." She turned back to her desk, signaling the end of the conversation. "He trusted you enough to test you. Think about that." Langston left the soup kitchen in a daze, barely noticing the rain soaking through his expensive coat. He drove home on autopilot, his mind replaying the scene in his office lobby over and over. The guard's suspicious glances, the executive's dismissive comments, his own damning silence. In his home office, he opened the bottom drawer of his desk. The rusted gun lay wrapped in the same paper towel from that first day, when Elijah had stood on the curb with trembling hands and fierce eyes. Langston carefully unwrapped it, feeling its cold weight. He studied the weapon in the dim light of his desk lamp. The metal was pitted and worn, the grip scratched. It looked like something found in a dumpster or abandoned lot, the kind of thing a desperate child might pick up, hoping it would make adults take him seriously. Sitting there holding the unloaded gun, Langston finally understood. Elijah hadn't been playing a prank that day. He hadn't been bluffing or just following one of his elaborate scenarios. He had been testing Langston, testing whether he would run away like everyone else or stay and face whatever came next. Langston had knelt down that day, had spoken calmly, had guided Elijah across the street. He'd passed the first part of the test. But now he realized it had only been half a victory. Because when it really mattered, when Elijah needed him to stand tall instead of kneel, to speak up instead of staying quiet, to fight instead of freeze, he had failed. The gun felt heavier now, weighted with this understanding. Langston placed it back in the drawer, his movements careful and deliberate. The metal seemed to hold all the words he should have said, all the actions he should have taken, all the courage he had failed to show when Elijah needed it most. The morning sun filtered through Langston's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across his minimalist living room. He sat in his favorite leather armchair, a cup of coffee growing cold on the side table. His phone lay in his lap, screen dark and silent, just like it had been for the past hour. Cynthia's words from yesterday echoed in his mind. "You want to love a black kid like a hobby." Each word stung more with each replay, like salt being rubbed into an open wound. He picked up his phone, unlocked it, and stared at their message thread. His thumbs hovered over the keyboard before typing out 2 simple words. "You were right." The message showed as delivered, but no response came. No typing bubbles appeared. Just silence. Langston got up and paced his apartment, stopping occasionally to look out at the city below. The streets were quieter on Saturday mornings, with fewer people rushing to meetings or important appointments. His reflection in the window looked tired, the dark circles under his eyes more pronounced than usual. He showered, changed into casual clothes, jeans and a sweater instead of his usual suit, and grabbed his keys. The drive to the soup kitchen was automatic now, his hands knowing the turns without much thought. He parked in the small lot behind the building and waited, watching volunteers and patrons come and go throughout the day. As the afternoon light began to fade and the last of the day's visitors filtered out, Langston finally got out of his car. He found the back door propped open, volunteers carrying out trash bags and empty containers. Without a word, he grabbed a broom and started sweeping the dining area. Sarah, the volunteer from yesterday, gave him a surprised look but didn't comment. He worked methodically, moving from table to table, gathering crumbs and napkins, straightening chairs. The physical labor felt good, giving his restless hands something to do. Eventually, Cynthia emerged from the office, keys jingling in her hand. She stopped short when she saw him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the room, the sound of cleaning and closing up continuing around them. "The mop's in the supply closet if you want to do the floors too," she finally said, her voice neutral. Langston nodded and retrieved the mop. He worked in silence while the other volunteers finished their tasks and left, calling out goodbyes to Cynthia. Soon, it was just the two of them in the large room, the smell of cleaning solution hanging in the air. "How is he?" Langston asked quietly, still mopping. Cynthia sat at one of the clean tables, her shoulders slightly slumped. "Not good," she admitted. "He's been quiet, barely touching his food. The shelter staff say he just lies in his bunk, staring at the wall. No more stories. No more missions." She paused, running a hand through her hair. "It's like watching a light go out." Langston stopped mopping, his hands tight on the handle. "Can I see him?" "No." The word was firm, definitive. "Not yet. Maybe not for a while." "I need to apologize," Langston insisted. "I need to explain—" "Explain what?" Cynthia cut him off. "That you're sorry you didn't speak up? That you'll do better next time?" He's heard all those promises before, Langston, from every adult who's let him down. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant sound of traffic outside. Langston leaned the mop against a table and sat down across from Cynthia, keeping his distance. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Why did you push us together?" Cynthia looked down at her hands folded on the table. When she looked up again, there was something different in her eyes, a vulnerability Langston hadn't seen before. "I'm sick," she said simply. Langston felt his chest tighten. "What do you mean, sick?" "Autoimmune disease." Her voice was steady, matter of fact. "The kind that doesn't get better. It's slow, but—" She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "Terminal." The word hung in the air between them like smoke. Langston felt the room tilt slightly, his mind struggling to process what she was saying. "How long have you known?" "A while. Before we separated." She gave a small, sad smile. "It wasn't just your emotional distance that ended our marriage, Langston. I was pushing you away too. I didn't want you to watch me." She stopped, shook her head. "But that's not important now." "Of course it's important," Langston started, but Cynthia held up a hand. "No, listen. I didn't tell you this to restart old conversations or make you feel guilty. I told you because you need to understand why Elijah matters so much, why what happened at your office matters so much." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "These kids, especially Elijah, they need people who will fight for them, who will stand up and say, 'This isn't right,' when the world tries to push them into corners. I won't be here forever to do that." Langston felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The weight of everything, Elijah's test, his own failure, Cynthia's illness, pressed down on him like a physical force. "I didn't know," he managed to say. "No one does, except my doctors and now you." She stood up, gathering her keys and bag. "And I'd like to keep it that way for now. The kids here, they've lost enough people. They don't need to worry about losing another one just yet." Langston watched her walk toward the door, wanting to say something but finding no words adequate for the moment. She paused at the threshold, looking back at him. "Finish mopping before you leave. The floor's still sticky by the serving counter." Then she was gone, leaving Langston alone in the dimly lit kitchen. He sat there for a long moment, the silence pressing in around him. Finally, he pulled out his phone and opened his notes app. His fingers moved slowly across the screen. "Fix this before time runs out." He stared at the words, feeling their weight, their urgency. Then he deleted them, watching each letter disappear. Standing up, he walked to his car in the alley behind the building, the evening air cool against his face. He sat behind the wheel, key in the ignition, but didn't turn it right away. The soup kitchen's back door light cast a yellow glow across the alley, creating long shadows that stretched toward his car. Finally, he started the engine, the quiet hum filling the space around him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete steps of the group home as Langston settled himself down, his back against the cold brick wall. He placed his backpack beside him, trying to ignore the peeling paint and the faint smell of mildew that seemed to seep from the building's pores. The plastic chess set he'd bought from the dollar store knocked against his knee through the thin fabric of the backpack. A few people passed by. A harried-looking social worker with a stack of files, 2 teenagers sharing earbuds, a maintenance man with a toolbox. Each gave him questioning looks, but no one stopped to ask why he was there. Langston checked his watch. 4:15 p.m. He'd wait as long as it took. The neighborhood sounds drifted around him. Distant car horns, the squeal of bus brakes, children shouting in a playground somewhere nearby. A cool breeze rustled through the few scraggly trees that lined the street, making their remaining leaves dance. Langston pulled his jacket tighter and kept his eyes on the door. At 4:37, the heavy metal door creaked open. Elijah stood in the doorway wearing the hoodie Langston had given him. His expression was carefully blank, but his eyes held a wariness that made Langston's chest ache. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Langston unzipped his backpack slowly, movements deliberate and calm, like approaching a spooked animal. The cheap chess set's plastic wrapping crinkled loudly in the quiet as he pulled it out. Without a word, he began setting up the board on the step beside him, arranging the lightweight pieces that felt too flimsy in his hands. Elijah watched, still standing in the doorway, his small frame tense. When all the pieces were in place, Langston scooted over slightly, making room on the step. He didn't look up, didn't pressure or plead. He just waited. After what felt like an eternity, Elijah's feet appeared in Langston's peripheral vision. The boy lowered himself onto the step, leaving careful space between them. His hands were buried deep in the hoodie's pockets. Langston rotated the board so the white pieces faced Elijah. Still no words passed between them as Elijah studied the setup, his eyes moving methodically across the ranks of pawns and pieces. Finally, his right hand emerged from his pocket and moved a pawn forward 2 spaces. They played in silence. The plastic pieces made hollow clicking sounds against the board. Cars passed. The sun inched lower. Neither spoke. Elijah played differently than before. No made-up rules, no fantastic stories about the pieces being secret agents or time travelers. His moves were careful, considered. When he took one of Langston's pieces, he set it aside gently instead of making explosion sounds like he used to. The game progressed slowly. Langston found himself in an increasingly difficult position, his king trapped between Elijah's advancing queen and a determined bishop. 3 moves later, Elijah had him in checkmate. He didn't celebrate or gloat, just sat there looking at the board. Langston reached into his backpack again, this time pulling out a worn notebook. The spiral binding was slightly crushed, and some pages were dog-eared. He opened it carefully to a page marked with a blue sticky note and laid it on the step between them. The page was filled with rough sketches, interface designs, character concepts, flowcharts. In the center was a logo. Spy missions in bold letters, surrounded by doodles of gadgets and secret doors. Below were notes in Langston's neat handwriting, user-created missions, customizable spy gear, real-world location integration. Elijah's eyes moved across the page, taking in the details. His expression remained neutral, but his body leaned forward slightly, betraying his interest. "You run it," Langston said quietly, his first words since arriving. "I help build it. Only if you want." Elijah's fingers traced the edge of one sketch, a cartoon figure that looked suspiciously like him in spy gear. He didn't look up when he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's the password for level 1? A small smile tugged at the corner of Langston's mouth. Apology. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Elijah's hand stilled on the page. He studied the sketches for another long moment, then stood up abruptly. Without a word, he gathered the chess pieces, carefully placing them in their plastic slots. He folded the board, tucked it under his arm, and walked back to the door. Langston watched him disappear inside, the heavy door closing behind him with a dull thud. The notebook lay open on the step, the evening breeze ruffling its pages. He gathered his things slowly, zipped up his backpack, and stood. The sun had nearly set, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. The chess set was gone, but the door had closed softly, not slammed. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. A crack in the wall. A password entered. The autumn days grew shorter, but Langston's world expanded. Every Wednesday afternoon, his sleek black car would idle outside Elijah's school, drawing curious glances from teachers and students alike. The first time, Elijah had approached cautiously, checking to make sure it was really Langston behind the wheel. Now, 3 weeks in, he bounded down the steps with his backpack swinging, already talking before he even opened the car door. "I got 3 new mission ideas today," Elijah announced, climbing into the back seat. He always chose to sit there, claiming it was more spy-like. "One's about a lunch lady who's actually an alien in disguise." Langston adjusted the rearview mirror to catch Elijah's animated expression. "Tell me more on the way to Cynthia's." The drive to Cynthia's apartment became a ritual of storytelling. Elijah would spin his tales while Langston navigated traffic, offering the occasional or interesting at just the right moments. Sometimes Langston caught himself smiling at the sheer creativity of the boy's imagination. Cynthia's apartment served as their development studio. The dining table became command central, covered in papers, colored markers, and Langston's laptop. The walls of her small living room displayed Elijah's best sketches. Spy gadgets, mission maps, and character designs held up with colorful pushpins. "See, this button needs to be bigger," Langston explained one afternoon, pointing to a wireframe on his screen. "Users, that means the people playing the game, need to find it easily with their thumbs." Elijah leaned in, his forehead wrinkled in concentration. "Like this?" He grabbed a piece of paper and drew a large circular button with "super secret spy stuff" written inside it. "Exactly," Langston nodded. "But maybe we can make the text shorter. Mission start might work better." "Boring," Elijah declared, but he redrew it anyway, adding little lightning bolts around the edges. From the kitchen, Cynthia watched them work while preparing snacks or tea. Her movements had become slower, more measured, but her eyes sparkled whenever she saw them collaborating. She'd rest against the counter, taking breaks more frequently now, but always present, always observing. The app took shape through their combined efforts. Langston handled the technical architecture while Elijah drove the creative direction. His hand-drawn icons gave the interface a unique charm, slightly wobbly lines and imperfect circles that felt more authentic than any polished graphics could achieve. "What if," Elijah suggested one evening, sketching furiously, "the missions are like treasure hunts, but instead of gold, you find stuff that helps people?" Langston looked up from his coding. "Like what?" "Like..." Elijah tapped his marker against his chin. "Like finding lost pets, or helping old ladies carry groceries. But you gotta do it secretly, like a real spy." "That's actually brilliant," Langston said, genuinely impressed. "We could use location services to identify nearby opportunities for random acts of kindness." Elijah beamed at the praise, then returned to his drawing with renewed enthusiasm. His mission prompts filled notebook after notebook. Track down the mysterious lunch thief who might be sharing with hungry kids. Infiltrate the playground clique to rescue the lonely new student. Decode why Mr. Langston's face is always sad. That last one made Langston pause. My face isn't always sad, he protested. Yeah, it is, Elijah insisted. Even when you smile, your eyes look like they're solving hard math problems. From the kitchen came the sound of Cynthia's laughter, though it ended in a slight cough. She brought them cookies and sat down to watch them work, her presence warm and steady, despite her increasing fatigue. The weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Wednesdays became sacred on Langston's calendar. No meetings, no calls, no emergencies could intrude on development time. His office learned to work around it, though few knew exactly where he disappeared to each week. One particularly productive evening, as autumn rain tapped against the windows, Elijah was working on a particularly detailed mission flow chart. His marker movements became slower, his explanations more mumbled, until finally his head drooped onto his folded arms. The marker rolled from his loose grip, leaving a small blue line on his latest masterpiece. Langston looked up from his laptop to find Elijah sound asleep at the table, his face peaceful in the soft lamplight. Without thinking, he stood and carefully lifted the boy, surprised at how light he felt. Elijah stirred slightly but didn't wake as Langston carried him to the couch, gently laying him down and pulling the throw blanket over his small frame. When he turned around, Cynthia was standing there with 2 mugs of tea, steam rising in delicate curls. She handed one to Langston, and they moved to the kitchen to avoid disturbing Elijah's sleep. "You're finally showing up," she said softly, watching Langston over the rim of her mug. Her words carried no judgment, just quiet observation. Langston wrapped his hands around the warm ceramic, feeling the heat seep into his fingers. He looked at Elijah's sleeping form on the couch, then back at Cynthia. "I just wish I hadn't needed you to disappear to start doing it." The smile faded from Cynthia's face, replaced by something more complex, determination mixed with gentle reproach. "I'm not disappearing, Lang," she said, her voice firm despite its softness. "I'm training you for what comes next." The next day, the crisp morning air held a hint of winter as Langston walked into his office building, his steps lighter than usual. The beta launch of the Spy Missions app at Elijah's school had exceeded their expectations. Despite its rough edges and occasional glitches, the kids had embraced it with enthusiasm that surprised even Elijah. During the test run, Langston had watched from the back of the classroom as 25 students navigated through their first missions. The room buzzed with excitement as they decoded messages, tracked down suspicious activity, mostly involving missing library books, and completed random acts of kindness disguised as top-secret operations. Elijah, sitting among his peers, tried to maintain his cool spy persona, but couldn't hide his pride. Every few minutes, he'd glance back at Langston with a barely contained grin. When one student discovered a bug that made their spy avatar spin uncontrollably, Elijah had jumped up to explain it was actually a special dizzy ray attack feature. The memory of that moment stayed with Langston as he rode the elevator to the executive floor. His phone buzzed with messages from the development team about minor fixes needed, but he barely noticed. Instead, he found himself scrolling through screenshots Elijah had sent of his classmates' mission reports. Agent K helped Mrs. Peterson carry her art supplies without being spotted. Secret Agent T discovered who was leaving encouraging notes in everyone's desks. Mission accomplished, Operation Lonely Lunch Table successfully infiltrated. The elevator doors opened to the familiar sight of glass walls and modern furniture. Sarah, his executive assistant, intercepted him with a stack of papers and a concerned look. "The board called an emergency meeting," she said, falling into step beside him. "They're waiting in the main conference room." Langston's good mood dimmed slightly, but he nodded. "Give me 5 minutes to review the agenda?" "They didn't send one," Sarah replied, her expression apologetic. The conference room doors felt heavier than usual as Langston pushed them open. 8 board members sat around the polished table, their faces a mix of impatience and carefully crafted neutrality. Marcus Chen, the newest member, offered a slight smile, but the others maintained their stern expressions. "Langston, good of you to join us," Richard Blackwood, the lead investor, gestured to an empty chair. "We've been discussing the company's current direction and resource allocation." Langston took his seat, noting the spreadsheets projected on the wall behind Richard. Fourth quarter projections, development costs, team assignments, all highlighted in accusatory red. Some concerns have been raised, Richard continued, about certain side projects consuming valuable resources. The room temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. Langston kept his face neutral, though his hands tightened imperceptibly under the table. The Educational Gaming Initiative, another board member chimed in, seems particularly unfocused. Our core business. Oh, you mean the Urban Diversity Pet Project? James Morrison, the oldest board member, interrupted with a dismissive chuckle. Quite a departure from our usual market position. The words hung in the air like poison. Langston felt his pulse quicken, his chest tightening with a familiar pressure. In the past, he might have let it slide, might have smiled politely and redirected the conversation to safe territory. But he saw Elijah's face in his mind, the pride when he showed his classmates the app, the careful attention he paid to every detail, the way he'd light up when explaining his latest mission idea. He thought of Cynthia's words about showing up, about what comes next. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. That's my co-founder's project, Langston said, his voice steady and clear. He's 8. You'll be lucky to be half as sharp. The room went completely still. James Morrison's smile froze, then crumbled at the edges. Richard Blackwood shifted in his chair, his fingers drumming once on the table before going still. Langston, Richard started, his tone carefully measured. We understand the charitable aspect, but it's not charity, Langston cut him off, standing up. It's innovation. It's the future. And if you can't see that, then maybe we need to discuss the board's composition rather than my resource allocation. He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence behind him. The conference room door closed with a soft click that felt louder than a slam. In the hallway, his hands were shaking. The familiar pressure in his chest had transformed into something else. Not anxiety, but energy. Raw, electric energy that demanded movement. He headed for the stairs. 20 flights down, his expensive dress shoes hitting each step with purposeful force. By the 10th floor, his breath came in controlled gasps. By the 5th, his suit jacket was draped over his arm. He didn't slow down. The lobby spread out before him, all marble and glass and carefully curated impressions of success. Langston stopped, his breath evening out, and looked around as if seeing it for the first time. There, on the wall behind the security desk, hung a large framed photograph he'd walked past hundreds of times without really seeing. It showed his company's first investor group, taken the day they closed their initial funding round. 12 men in expensive suits, all white, all wearing the same satisfied smile. Langston pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of the photo. His fingers moved quickly over the screen as he opened his messages with Elijah. Mission, change the wall, he typed. The response came almost instantly, as if Elijah had been waiting by his phone during class. Accepted. The Saturday morning sun filtered through the curtains of Cynthia's apartment, casting gentle shadows across the living room. Langston stood in the doorway, his hand still on the knob, taking in the scene before him. Cynthia lay curled on the couch, her breathing shallow but steady. A breakfast tray on the coffee table beside her untouched. A glass of orange juice had grown warm, condensation pooling at its base, and a piece of wheat toast had gone cold and stiff. In the kitchen, Elijah sat at the table, his small frame hunched over a sketchbook. The scratch of his colored pencils against paper was the only sound in the apartment. He didn't look up when Langston entered, but his shoulders relaxed slightly, acknowledging the familiar presence. Langston moved quietly through the space, his dress shoes making soft clicks against the hardwood floor despite his careful steps. He glanced at Cynthia's sleeping form, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the way her cheekbones seemed sharper than the week before. Her normally neat braids lay tangled against the throw pillow, and a light blanket had slipped halfway to the floor. Without thinking, Langston reached down and gently adjusted the blanket, pulling it up to her shoulders. Cynthia didn't stir. Her breathing remained unchanged, each inhale a little more labored than it should have been. He made his way to the kitchen, pulling out the chair across from Elijah. The boy continued drawing, his hand moving in quick, precise strokes across the paper. Up close, Langston could see it was another mission scenario, something involving what looked like a secret underground library and a team of spy squirrels. "How long has she been sleeping?" Langston asked, keeping his voice low. Elijah paused his drawing, finally looking up. His dark eyes held a wisdom that made Langston's chest ache. "Since last night. She tried to make breakfast but got too tired." Langston nodded, his gaze drifting back to the untouched tray. Before he could respond, Elijah put down his pencil and reached into the pocket of his hoodie, the one Langston had given him weeks ago. He pulled out a small black flash drive. "She told me to give you this," Elijah said, sliding it across the table. "If she couldn't get out of bed." The flash drive looked impossibly small in Langston's hand. He turned it over, noting how the plastic was slightly worn at the edges, as if it had been handled frequently. "When did she give you this?" Langston asked. "Last month." Elijah picked up his pencil again but didn't resume drawing. "She made me promise not to lose it." Langston pulled his laptop from his messenger bag, setting it on the kitchen table. The startup sound seemed too loud in the quiet apartment, and he quickly adjusted the volume. The flash drive slid into the USB port with a soft click. A window popped up, revealing dozens of folders. Some contained photos. He recognized many from their college days, others from the soup kitchen, community events, and volunteer projects. There were spreadsheets filled with contact information for various organizations, detailed notes about ongoing initiatives, and countless letters addressed to different people. At the bottom of the window sat a folder titled, "How to Keep Going Without Me." Langston's finger hovered over the trackpad. He clicked. A video file opened automatically. Cynthia's face filled the screen, healthy and vibrant, clearly recorded months ago. She sat in this same kitchen, early morning light making her skin glow. Her smile was gentle but determined. "Hey, Lang," her recorded voice came through the speakers, soft but clear. "If you're watching this, it means things have gotten harder. But that's okay. We planned for harder." Langston felt his throat tighten. On screen, Cynthia adjusted her position slightly. "I've included everything you need to keep the programs running. Contact lists, grant applications, schedules, it's all there. But that's not why I made this video." She paused, leaning closer to the camera. "I need you to understand something important. Don't let your empathy end with me. Don't let him become someone else's mission." The words hit Langston like a physical force. He turned away from the screen, blinking rapidly, desperate to hide the tears that threatened to spill. Across the table, Elijah had resumed drawing, his pencil moving with deliberate focus, giving Langston the privacy he needed. Through the speakers, Cynthia continued speaking, her voice steady and warm. She detailed plans, shared memories, offered guidance, but Langston barely registered the words. His mind kept returning to that single phrase. Don't let him become someone else's mission. He thought about all the missions he and Elijah had created, their silly spy games, their app development sessions, their chess matches with made-up rules. Each one had started as play, but had grown into something more significant, something real. When the video ended, the kitchen fell silent again. Langston wiped his eyes quickly with the back of his hand before turning back to face Elijah, who was still pretending to be absorbed in his drawing. The hours passed slowly. Langston heated some soup he found in the fridge, and they ate together quietly. He helped Elijah with his homework, reviewed some new mission ideas for the app, and kept one eye on Cynthia's sleeping form. As evening approached, the apartment grew darker. Langston had just finished helping Elijah set up his tablet to watch a movie when he heard a soft stirring from the living room. Cynthia's eyes fluttered open, taking in the dimmed lights and the quiet activity around her. Langston moved to her side, settling into the armchair next to the couch. He reached out and took her hand, noting how cool her fingers felt against his palm. Her grip was weak but present. "I got the drive," he whispered, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. Cynthia's lips curved into a soft smile, her eyes tired but clear. "Then you've got everything," she murmured. Days later, the autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Langston's car pulled up to the youth center. The brick building stood proud but weathered, its walls covered in colorful murals of children playing, reading, and dreaming. Through the passenger window, Elijah pressed his face against the glass, his breath fogging up the surface. "You ready?" Langston asked, putting the car in park. Elijah nodded, though his fingers fidgeted with the zipper of his hoodie. "Yeah, just what if they don't like it?" Langston reached into the back seat, lifting one of the cardboard boxes. "They'll love it. Know why?" He waited until Elijah looked at him. "Because you made it for kids just like you. Real stories, real missions." They gathered their supplies from the car, 3 boxes of printed flyers, Langston's laptop bag, and a rolled-up vinyl banner that Elijah insisted on carrying himself, even though it was almost as tall as he was. The banner kept threatening to unroll, making Elijah stumble every few steps, but he refused help. Inside, the youth center hummed with afternoon activity. Kids of various ages moved between rooms, their voices echoing off the high ceilings. The walls were lined with artwork and achievement certificates, much like Langston remembered from his visits with Cynthia months ago. Ms. Thompson, the center's director, met them in the lobby. Her eyes lit up with recognition. "Well, if it isn't Cynthia's better half," she said warmly, then knelt to Elijah's level. "And you must be the young man she can't stop talking about." Elijah straightened up, still clutching the banner. "I'm the co-founder," he said, his voice carrying a hint of pride beneath the nervousness. "That you are," Langston confirmed, setting down the boxes. He helped Elijah unfurl the banner, revealing the bold text, "Mission, Possible, Build Your Story," alongside colorful graphics that Elijah had designed himself. As they set up in the main activity room, more staff members gathered around. Langston noticed Elijah's shoulders tensing slightly at the attention, but the boy kept working, methodically arranging flyers and helping to tape the banner to the wall. When the room filled with kids, Langston stepped forward to speak, but Elijah tugged at his sleeve. Can I do it?" he whispered. Langston nodded, stepping back. "Floor's yours, partner." Elijah moved to the front of the room, his small frame somehow seeming taller. He cleared his throat. Hi, I'm Elijah. I'm 8. He paused, glancing at Langston, who gave him an encouraging nod. "And I'm a co-founder of Mission Possible." The words came easier after that. Elijah explained how the app worked, how kids could create their own missions or join existing ones. He demonstrated the interface on the projected laptop screen, showing how users could track their progress, earn badges, and share their stories. "It's not just pretend missions," Elijah explained, his voice growing stronger. "It's real stuff too, like being brave when you're scared, or helping someone who needs it, or..." He hesitated, then continued, "or letting people care about you even when you think they might leave." The room grew quiet at that, several staff members exchanging knowing looks. But then a hand shot up from the crowd of kids. "Can we make our own missions right now?" a girl asked, bouncing in her seat. Elijah's face broke into a genuine smile. "Yeah, that's why we brought these." He gestured to a stack of colorful paper cards and markers. "We're making a mission wall. You write your mission, and when you complete it, you get to put it up." The room erupted into excited chatter as kids grabbed supplies and began writing. Langston helped distribute materials, watching as Elijah moved between groups, offering suggestions and encouragement. It was like watching a different child, confident, engaged, natural in his leadership. The mission wall quickly filled with cards. "Help my little sister with homework for a week. Make a new friend at school. Learn to cook dinner for my grandma. Tell someone thank you every day." Langston noticed Elijah hanging back, holding his own card, waiting until most kids had moved away from the wall. When he thought no one was watching, he quickly pinned his card in a corner. "Mission: Be brave for Cynthia." The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Kids downloaded the app, created profiles, and started forming mission teams. The staff praised the built-in safety features and educational elements that Langston had insisted on including. But what struck him most was how the kids naturally gravitated toward Elijah, treating him not as another participant, but as a leader, someone who understood their stories because he was living one himself. As the event wound down, Ms. Thompson pulled Langston aside. "Cynthia told me what you've been doing," she said quietly. "How you've stepped up. This program, it's exactly what our kids need. A way to make their struggles feel like victories waiting to happen." Langston watched Elijah helping younger kids write their missions. "He taught me that," he admitted. "How to turn fear into adventure, pain into purpose." The sun was setting as they packed up the remaining supplies. Elijah was quieter now, tired but content. They walked toward the car, their footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. "Do you think she knew?" Elijah asked suddenly, his voice small in the growing darkness. "Knew what?" "How much I needed her." Elijah kicked at a pile of leaves, not looking up. Langston stopped walking, turning to face his young partner. "Yeah," he said softly. "And she knew how much I needed you too." Sometime later, the hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors and the soft whoosh of the heating system. Cynthia lay propped up against white pillows, her normally vibrant presence diminished by the harsh fluorescent lighting and sterile surroundings. Her skin had taken on a pallid tone, and dark circles shadowed her eyes, but her smile remained warm when Langston and Elijah entered the room. "There are my favorite spies," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elijah approached the bed carefully, as if afraid his movements might somehow hurt her. He carried a tablet loaded with their app, clutching it like a shield. "We got 20 more downloads today," he reported, trying to sound upbeat. "And Ms. Thompson says 3 more youth centers want to try it." Cynthia's eyes brightened. "That's wonderful, baby." She patted the edge of the bed, and Elijah perched there, showing her the newest features they'd added. Langston hung back, watching them interact. He noticed how Cynthia had to pause between sentences to catch her breath, how her hands trembled slightly as she pointed at the screen. The doctors had explained that her condition was progressing faster than expected, but seeing the daily changes made his chest tight with worry. As evening approached, a nurse came in to check Cynthia's vitals. "Visiting hours are almost over," she reminded them gently. Elijah's shoulders stiffened. "I'm not leaving," he declared, his voice firm but small. The nurse looked at Langston, who shook his head slightly. "We'll stay a bit longer," he said. The nurse nodded understanding and left them alone. Langston could see exhaustion creeping over Cynthia's features, but she was fighting to stay awake for Elijah's sake. The boy had pulled up a chair and was showing her his notebook of new mission ideas, though his usual enthusiasm was subdued. "Hey, partner," Langston said, touching Elijah's shoulder. "Want some hot chocolate? I saw a vending machine down the hall." Elijah glanced at Cynthia, reluctant to move. She gave him an encouraging nod. "Get some for me too," she said. "Extra marshmallows." Langston returned a few minutes later with 2 paper cups of steaming chocolate. He handed one to Elijah, who had barely moved from his spot. Cynthia's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow but steady. She stirred when Elijah accidentally rattled his cup against the bed rail. "Lang," she whispered, "would you take Elijah for a little walk? I need to rest my eyes for a minute." Langston understood what she wasn't saying. She needed a moment alone, needed not to perform strength she didn't have. "Come on, buddy," he said to Elijah. "Let's go check out the view from the big windows." Elijah resisted at first, but Cynthia squeezed his hand. "Go on, I'll be right here when you get back." In the hallway, their footsteps echoed against the linoleum floors. Other visitors passed by, some crying, some laughing softly, all wrapped up in their own stories of hope and fear. Elijah walked close to Langston, his shoulders hunched, hot chocolate forgotten in his hands. They reached the large windows at the end of the corridor. The city sprawled out below them, a tapestry of lights in the growing darkness. Langston placed a hand on Elijah's back, feeling the tension in the small body. "She's tired," Langston said softly. "But she's not gone." Elijah's hands clenched into fists, causing the paper cup to crumple. Hot chocolate spilled over his fingers, but he didn't seem to notice. "That's what they said about my mom too," he said, his voice cracking. Langston's heart clenched. He knelt beside Elijah, taking the crushed cup and setting it aside. The boy's hands were sticky with chocolate, and Langston pulled out a tissue to clean them, giving them both a moment to collect themselves. "Then let's not waste the time we still have," Langston said finally, his voice gentle but firm. Elijah looked at him, really looked at him, his young face full of too much understanding. "How do you do that?" he asked. "How do you be brave when you're scared too?" Langston thought about it. "Maybe being brave isn't about not being scared," he said. "Maybe it's about being scared and staying anyway." They walked back to Cynthia's room slowly, Langston's hand on Elijah's shoulder. The boy seemed to be processing, his steps becoming more purposeful with each stride. When they returned, Cynthia had managed to sit up a little straighter. She smiled at them, though the effort was visible. Elijah approached the bed, then hesitated, looking at all the tubes and wires. "It's okay," Cynthia assured him. "Come here." Elijah carefully climbed onto the bed beside her, mindful of the IV lines. Cynthia reached for the thin hospital blanket and pulled it over them both, tucking it around Elijah's shoulders. The boy curled into her side, his small frame fitting perfectly in the curve of her arm. Langston stood in the doorway watching them. His throat felt tight and he had to swallow hard against the emotion rising there. The scene before him was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Cynthia's dark curls mingling with Elijah's on the white pillow, their hands clasped together on top of the blanket, the way they both seemed to draw strength from each other's presence. The room fell quiet except for their soft breathing, and the steady rhythm of the heart monitor continued its vigilant song. The morning light was just beginning to filter through the hospital room's blinds, casting thin stripes across the linoleum floor. Langston had fallen asleep in an awkward position, his long frame cramped in the vinyl chair, his suit jacket draped over his chest like a blanket. Across from him, Elijah was curled up in a larger recliner, his small body nearly swallowed by the cushions. They had stayed late the night before, neither wanting to leave Cynthia's side despite her insistence that they go home and rest. A gentle hand on Langston's shoulder roused him from his uncomfortable sleep. His eyes opened to find Sarah, the night nurse who had cared for Cynthia over the past weeks, standing over him. There was something in her expression that made his chest tighten before she even spoke. "Mr. Reed," she said softly, her voice careful and measured. "I need to speak with you." Langston glanced at Elijah, still sleeping peacefully, then stood and followed Sarah a few steps away. His body felt stiff, his neck aching from the awkward position he'd slept in. But all physical discomfort faded when Sarah spoke again. "Ms. Thompson passed away about an hour ago," she said, her tone gentle but direct. "It was peaceful, in her sleep." The words hit Langston like a physical blow. He steadied himself against the wall, his vision blurring slightly. They had known this was coming, had tried to prepare, but the reality of it still felt impossible to process. "Elijah," he managed to say, looking back at the sleeping boy. Sarah nodded, understanding. "Would you like me to stay while you wake him?" Langston shook his head. "No, I need to do this." He walked back to where Elijah slept, his feet feeling heavy with each step. The boy's face was relaxed in sleep, one hand tucked under his cheek. Langston knelt beside the chair, placing his hand gently on Elijah's shoulder. "Elijah," he said softly, "wake up, buddy." Elijah stirred, his eyes opening slowly. For a moment there was just confusion, then awareness began to dawn. He looked past Langston to Cynthia's bed, now empty, the sheets already stripped away. "No," Elijah whispered, his voice small and broken. "No, no, no." Langston pulled him close as the boy began to shake, holding him tight as the first sob broke free. Elijah's fingers gripped Langston's shirt, his face pressed into the man's shoulder as grief overtook him. "I'm here," Langston murmured, his own tears falling silently. "I'm right here." The days that followed passed in a blur of arrangements and paperwork. Langston handled everything, determined to honor Cynthia's wishes for a small, intimate service. She had left detailed instructions. No formal church service, just a gathering of the people who meant most to her at the community center where she'd done so much of her work. The morning of the funeral dawned clear and cool. The community center's main room had been transformed, Chairs arranged in a semicircle, photos of Cynthia displayed on easels. Her smile beamed from every image, serving at the soup kitchen, working with kids at the center, laughing with Elijah over their app designs. People filed in quietly, volunteers from the soup kitchen, kids from the youth programs, community members whose lives Cynthia had touched. Langston stood at the door, greeting each person, accepting hugs and condolences with quiet grace. Elijah sat in the front row, wearing a new black suit that Langston had bought him, his hands clutching a piece of paper. When it was time, he walked to the front of the room, his steps steady, despite his obvious nervousness. "Cynthia helped me write this," he said, his voice small but clear. "We worked on it a few weeks ago. She said sometimes it's easier to say important things if you write them down first." He unfolded the paper carefully, smoothing out the creases. To everyone who showed up, he began reading, "Thank you, don't stop." His voice wavered slightly, but he continued. "Don't stop showing up for each other. Don't stop believing in second chances. Don't stop fighting for what's right. Don't stop loving even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Elijah paused, taking a deep breath. "Cynthia taught me that missions aren't just games. They're about finding courage when you're scared, and helping others find theirs too. She was the bravest person I knew, and she made everyone around her braver." There wasn't a dry eye in the room as Elijah finished reading. He walked back to his seat beside Langston, who squeezed his shoulder gently. After the service, as people mingled and shared memories over coffee and the food they'd brought, Elijah wandered through the community center. He found Langston sitting alone in Cynthia's old office, holding something in his hands. It was the drawing Elijah had given him months ago, the one he'd torn in anger after the incident at Langston's office. But now it was carefully pieced back together, the tears mended with clear tape. Langston ran his fingers over the repaired edges, lost in thought. Elijah watched him for a moment, then reached into his suit pocket. He pulled out a small, worn notebook, Cynthia's mission notebook. The cover was soft from use, the edges of the pages slightly dog-eared. He approached Langston quietly and placed it in the man's hands. "There's one last mission she left in here," Elijah said softly. Langston looked at the notebook, recognition flickering across his face. He'd seen Cynthia writing in it countless times, but had never known what was inside. With careful fingers, he opened it to the final page. There, in Cynthia's familiar handwriting, were two simple words that carried the weight of a lifetime. "Raise him." The late August sun beat down on the freshly painted sign of the youth center. Langston and Elijah stood side by side on the sidewalk, taking in the transformed building before them. The peeling paint and cracked windows were gone, replaced by fresh white walls and gleaming glass. But it was the new name that drew their attention: the Cynthia Langston Mission House. Elijah reached out and touched the bronze plaque beneath the sign. His fingers traced the engraved words, "Her kindness trained us. Now we train others." The metal was warm from the summer heat. "Do you think she'd like it?" Elijah asked, his voice quiet but steady. Langston adjusted his tie, a habit he hadn't quite broken despite trading his usual suits for more casual clothes these days. "She'd probably say we spent too much money on the sign." That drew a small laugh from Elijah. "Yeah, she'd want it to go to the food budget instead." "Which is why we did both," Langston said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. The updated budget showing increased funding for all of Cynthia's original programs. Life at home was still finding its rhythm. Their two-bedroom apartment near the center was modest by Langston's former standards, but felt right for their new life together. The walls were gradually filling with Elijah's artwork and photos. The kitchen showed signs of their learning curve: a slightly scorched toaster, mismatched plates, and a growing collection of takeout menus for nights when cooking experiments went wrong. Mornings were particularly challenging. Langston, used to early starts and efficient routines, found himself struggling with the unpredictable nature of getting an 8-year-old ready for school. There were missing shoes, forgotten homework, and the daily negotiation over breakfast choices. "You can't have pizza rolls for breakfast," Langston would say, trying to sound authoritative while simultaneously burning another piece of toast. "Cynthia let me have them sometimes," Elijah would counter. though they both knew this wasn't true. The mention of her name still brought a pause to their conversations, but the sharp pain was slowly softening into something more bearable, more like a familiar ache they carried together. School pickups were another adventure and adjustment. Langston had rearranged his entire work schedule, delegating more to his team so he could be there at 3:15 each day. He still took calls while waiting in the carpool line, but now they were just as likely to be about Elijah's upcoming parent-teacher conference as they were about company matters. The harder moments came with discipline and emotional boundaries. Langston, raised in a household where feelings were rarely discussed, found himself navigating unfamiliar territory. He'd read parenting books late at night, made spreadsheets of strategies, but real life rarely followed the neat patterns he preferred. One evening after dinner, the tension that had been building all day finally broke. Elijah had been pushing the limits of their agreed-upon screen time, insisting on just 5 more minutes of his game multiple times. "That's enough," Langston said firmly, reaching for the tablet. "We had a deal." "You don't understand," Elijah snapped, pulling the device away. "I was almost finished with my mission." "The mission can wait until tomorrow." "No, it can't. You always want everything to follow your stupid rules." The words hung in the air between them. Elijah's eyes widened, a flash of fear crossing his face, the old fear of what happened when adults got angry. Before Langston could respond, Elijah ran to his room, the door slamming with a force that rattled the pictures on the walls. Langston stood in the hallway, hand raised to knock, then stopped. The parenting books had chapters about moments like this, but none of them felt right. Instead, he went to the kitchen and found a notepad, the same kind Cynthia used to use for her mission notes. He wrote carefully, then slid the paper under Elijah's door. "Mission: forgive a guy who doesn't know how to do this yet." For a long moment there was silence. Then the door opened slowly. Elijah stood there, eyes red but dry, looking up at Langston. Without a word, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Langston's waist, hugging him tight. Langston hugged back, his throat tight with emotion. Later that night, as Langston tucked Elijah into bed, his eyes fell on the framed photograph on the nightstand. It had been taken at the park during one of their early chess matches. Cynthia had caught them mid-laugh as Elijah explained one of his made-up rules. In the picture, Langston's usual reserved expression was cracked wide open with genuine joy, while Elijah gestured dramatically about whatever impossible move he'd just invented. Cynthia's reflection was visible in the chessboard's glossy surface, her smile knowing and warm. Langston adjusted Elijah's blanket, smoothing out the wrinkles. "Good night, buddy." "Wait," Elijah said softly, looking at the photo. "She'd be proud of your mission report." Langston smiled, his hand resting gently on Elijah's shoulder. "I'm not done writing it." The school auditorium buzzed with excitement, filled to capacity with families, teachers, and community members. Fluorescent lights illuminated the worn wooden stage where a podium stood, waiting. In the front row, Langston adjusted his tie for the 10th time, his heart hammering against his ribs with an intensity that surprised him. He'd given countless presentations to rooms full of investors, but nothing had made him this nervous. The past year had transformed both their lives. The Mission Possible app had grown from a simple father-son project into something that touched hundreds of lives. Elijah had shot up several inches, his voice beginning to crack, his mind sharper than ever. The transition from elementary to middle school brought new challenges, but they faced them together, learning and adapting day by day. Principal Martinez stepped up to the microphone, her voice cutting through the chatter. "For our next presenter at this year's Community Tech Showcase, please welcome Elijah Thompson Langston." Langston's breath caught at the hyphenated surname, still new, still precious. The adoption had been finalized just 3 months ago, marked by tearful hugs and a celebration at their favorite diner. Elijah emerged from behind the curtain, looking suddenly older in his crisp button-up shirt and dark jeans. His walk was confident, measured, so different from the wary child who had once pointed a rusty gun at a stranger. He adjusted the microphone with practiced ease, his eyes scanning the crowd before finding Langston's face. "This app started because someone told me to kill a guy." Laughter rippled through the audience, slightly uncertain. Langston felt his lips twitch, remembering that cloudy morning that had changed everything. Elijah's smile grew wider. But what she really meant was, make him feel something again. Make him see. And maybe, his voice softened, let him save someone too. The room grew quiet, hanging on every word. Elijah gestured to the large screen behind him, where screenshots of the Mission Possible app appeared. The interface was clean but playful, featuring Elijah's hand-drawn icons and mission prompts that ranged from silly to profound. We started with simple missions, Elijah continued, clicking through the slides. Brush your teeth while hopping on one foot. Pretend your homework is a secret code. Make your bed like you're building a fort. More laughter, warmer now. But then we realized something. Kids like me, kids in tough situations, we need different kinds of missions too. The screen showed a new section of the app, grief missions. Langston felt his throat tighten. They developed this part together during the dark months after Cynthia's passing, turning their pain into purpose. Sometimes the mission is just getting out of bed, Elijah explained, his voice steady but gentle. Sometimes it's letting yourself cry, or remembering how to laugh, or trusting that tomorrow might be better than today. He clicked to a statistics slide, the numbers bold against the dark background. In our district alone, over 200 kids use Mission Possible every day. We've logged more than 15,000 completed missions. That's 15,000 moments where someone chose to keep trying, to keep believing, to keep going. The audience sat transfixed. In the second row, Langston spotted several of his board members, the same ones who had once dismissed this as a pet project. They were leaning forward now, taking notes. But the most important mission? Elijah paused, his eyes finding Langston again. That belonged to him. He pointed directly at his father. He saved me by showing up, but he also made me earn his trust. I needed both. Langston felt tears threatening to spill. He remembered all the small moments that had built their trust. Chess games with made-up rules, burnt breakfasts, late-night conversations, arguments that ended in understanding, victories celebrated together, failures faced side by side. The audience erupted in applause, rising to their feet in a wave of appreciation and emotion. Langston stood, no longer trying to hide the tears in his eyes. His son, his brilliant, resilient, amazing son, had done this, had taken their story of loss and fear and turned it into something that helped others find their way through the dark. Elijah stepped away from the podium, ignoring the stares and jumping down from the stage with the casual grace of youth. He walked straight to Langston, who knelt down out of habit, though they were nearly the same height now. Your mission was successful, Elijah whispered, wrapping his arms around his father. They hugged tightly, oblivious to the continuing applause. Behind them, the presentation screen faded to black, displaying the familiar game-style text they had designed together. Level cleared. Continue. Langston pulled back just enough to see his son's face, his smile full of pride and love. Always. If you enjoyed the story of Elijah, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.